December 25th, 1776. George Washington stands at the Delaware River, preparing for what would become one of history's most famous military maneuvers. But what if, in that frozen moment, a single musket ball had found its mark? What if the man who held the American Revolution together simply wasn't there to hold it together? This isn't just speculation. Washington came within inches of death multiple times during the war. Today, we're exploring a terrifying alternate timeline where America's most crucial leader dies before the nation is even born. To understand why Washington's death would have been catastrophic, we need to grasp just how unique his role was in 1776. He wasn't just a general commanding troops. He was the revolution incarnate. Think about it. The Continental Congress was a mess of competing egos and regional interests. New England radicals wanted immediate independence. Southern plantation owners worried about their economic interests. Middle colony merchants feared losing British trade connections. These weren't natural allies, and they certainly didn't trust each other. But they all trusted Washington. Here was a Virginia aristocrat who gave up his comfortable life to lead a war he might not win. A man wealthy enough that he refused any salary from Congress, asking only that they cover his expenses. When soldiers hadn't been paid in months and were threatening mutiny, Washington would appear at their camps and somehow convince them to stay. This wasn't just charisma. Washington had something rarer: moral authority. When he spoke, people listened. When he made promises, people believed him. When he asked for sacrifice, people sacrificed. But Washington was also incredibly lucky to be alive. At the Battle of the Monongahela in 1755, 4 bullets tore through his coat and 2 horses were shot from under him. During the Revolution, he repeatedly exposed himself to enemy fire, believing that seeing their commander in danger would inspire his men. It worked, but it was insanely risky. Let's imagine Washington's luck runs out during the crossing of the Delaware. Perhaps a Hessian patrol spots the boats earlier than expected. Maybe a sharpshooter gets a clear shot during the landing. The specifics don't matter. What matters is this. On December 26, 1776, George Washington is dead. The news spreads through the Continental Army like wildfire. But unlike Washington's victories, this news destroys morale instantly. Soldiers who had stayed because they believed in Washington now have no reason to continue fighting. Desertions begin immediately. Within hours, express riders are racing toward Philadelphia, carrying the devastating news to Congress. When they arrive, the delegates don't just lose their commanding general. They lose the one person everyone in that room respected, regardless of their political differences. And that's when everything falls apart. Without Washington, the Continental Army faces an immediate leadership crisis. Who takes command? The obvious candidates are a disaster waiting to happen. Horatio Gates seems like the logical choice. He's the hero of Saratoga, after all. But Gates is also arrogant, politically ambitious, and openly contemptuous of civilian authority. He's been plotting against Washington for months, writing letters to Congress suggesting he deserves more credit for America's victories. Put Gates in overall command, and he'll immediately start consolidating power. This isn't speculation. It's exactly what ambitious generals do when civilian authority is weak. Gates won't just command the army. He'll start making political decisions, negotiating directly with state governments, maybe even opening separate peace talks with the British. Then there's Nathaniel Greene, probably the most competent military mind after Washington. Greene is brilliant, but he's also a Quaker from Rhode Island, with 0 political experience. He understands tactics and strategy, but he doesn't understand the delicate balance of regional interests holding the revolution together. Benedict Arnold is still a patriot in 1776, remember. His betrayal won't happen for another 4 years. Arnold is brave, experienced, and popular with his men. He's also got an ego the size of Connecticut and a massive chip on his shoulder about not getting enough recognition. Without Washington to keep him in check, Arnold's ambitions would run wild. He'd see Washington's death as his opportunity to finally get the glory he thinks he deserves. Meanwhile, civilian leaders like John Adams and Benjamin Franklin are desperately trying to hold things together from Philadelphia. But here's the problem. They're civilians. They don't command troops. They can't stop generals from ignoring orders or making independent decisions. The Continental Congress, which was already struggling with regional divisions, completely splinters. New England delegates start talking about going it alone. Southern representatives begin secret negotiations to protect their slave-based economy. The middle colonies consider returning to British rule entirely. But the real disaster is international. America's foreign support was always fragile, based largely on European powers believing the Americans might actually win. And that belief was tied directly to Washington's reputation. France had been secretly supporting America since 1775, sending weapons and military advisors. But this support was conditional on American success. French Foreign Minister Vergennes had specifically mentioned Washington in his reports to King Louis XVI, describing him as proof that the Americans had real leadership. When news of Washington's death reaches Versailles, the reaction is swift and brutal. French military advisors are recalled, weapons shipments stop, plans for formal alliance are shelved indefinitely. Spain, which had been considering joining the war against Britain, immediately backs away. The Dutch, who had been providing loans and supplies through Caribbean trading posts, cut off credit. Suddenly, America isn't just fighting alone. It's fighting broke and isolated. The British, meanwhile, recognize the golden opportunity. General Howe immediately shifts strategy from trying to crush the Continental Army to dividing American political leadership. Why fight a costly war when you can win through diplomacy and bribery? British agents begin approaching individual colonies with separate peace offers, generous terms for returning to the empire, pardons for most rebel leaders, local autonomy on certain issues. For war-weary colonists facing economic collapse, these offers start looking very attractive. So where does this lead? History gives us three likely scenarios, each more troubling than the last. The first possibility is military dictatorship. Horatio Gates or Benedict Arnold seizes control of what's left of the Continental Army and marches on Philadelphia. They dissolve the Continental Congress, declare martial law, and establish military rule. This isn't far-fetched. It's exactly what happened in most other revolutions throughout history. The American Revolution succeeded partly because Washington refused to become a dictator, even when his officers suggested it. Remove Washington, and that restraint disappears. Under military rule, America might still win independence, but it would emerge as an authoritarian state rather than a republic. Think Napoleon in France, but 20 years earlier and with less competent leadership. The second scenario, regional fragmentation. Without Washington's unifying presence, the different colonial regions go their separate ways. New England, with its radical politics and maritime economy, declares independence and tries to continue the war alone. The middle colonies, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, negotiate separate terms with Britain. They're allowed to return to the empire with guarantees of local self-government and no taxation without representation. The South cuts its own deal to protect slavery and maintain its plantation economy. Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia become a semi-autonomous British dominion, similar to what Canada would become later. The result? No United States. Just a collection of separate political entities with different relationships to the British Empire. The third and most likely scenario, total collapse. Without Washington's leadership, without foreign support, and facing British diplomatic pressure, the revolution simply falls apart. By summer 1777, most Continental Army units have disbanded. State militias return home. The Continental Congress dissolves as delegates flee Philadelphia ahead of advancing British forces. Britain doesn't even need a major military victory. They just wait for American resistance to crumble, then impose a harsh peace settlement. Mass executions of rebel leaders, permanent military occupation, heavy taxation, to pay for the cost of suppressing the rebellion. The Declaration of Independence becomes a historical footnote, a failed document by a failed revolution. But here's what makes Washington's hypothetical death truly catastrophic: the global implications. The American Revolution wasn't just about American independence. It was proof that Enlightenment ideas about self-government could actually work. Without that proof, democratic revolutions worldwide take very different paths. The French Revolution, which was partly inspired by American success, becomes even more violent and chaotic. Instead of looking to America as a model of successful republicanism, French revolutionaries have no successful example to follow. Latin American independence movements in the early 1800s become military dictatorships from the start. Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín don't have Washington's example of voluntarily giving up power, so they don't voluntarily give up power. The spread of democratic ideals is delayed by decades, maybe centuries. The 19th century becomes an age of monarchies and military strongmen, rather than expanding democracy. Even more importantly, there's no United States Constitution. People forget that the Constitutional Convention of 1787 happened largely because Washington agreed to preside over it. He was literally the only person trusted by all factions to lead those discussions. Without Washington, the Articles of Confederation remain America's government. But the Articles were a disaster. They created a weak central government that couldn't tax, couldn't regulate trade between states, and couldn't enforce its own laws. Under the Articles, the American states would have eventually fought civil wars over territorial disputes, trade disagreements, and slavery. The country would have broken apart decades before the actual Civil War. So why was Washington truly irreplaceable? Not because he was a military genius. He made plenty of mistakes. Not because he was a great politician. He often stayed above partisan fights. Washington was irreplaceable because he had something that can't be taught or replicated: moral authority combined with personal restraint. In an age of massive egos and personal ambition, Washington consistently chose duty over personal gain. When his officers suggested he become king, he was horrified by the idea. When politicians tried to drag him into partisan fights, he refused to take sides. Most importantly, when the war ended, he did something that shocked the world. He gave up power voluntarily. King George III reportedly said that if Washington voluntarily stepped down, he would be the greatest man in the world. This wasn't just admirable, it was essential. It established the precedent that in America, military leaders serve civilian authority, not the other way around. It proved that Republican government could actually work. Remove Washington from history, and that precedent never gets established. Democracy becomes just another failed experiment, like the Roman Republic or the Greek city-states. The American Revolution succeeded by the narrowest of margins. A few different decisions, a harsher winter, one more military defeat, and the world we know would never have existed. Washington himself understood this. In 1783, he wrote to Nathanael Greene, "The hand of Providence has been so conspicuous in all this that he must be worse than an infidel that lacks faith, and more than wicked that has not gratitude enough to acknowledge his obligations." Modern historians are less religious in their language, but they reach the same conclusion. The American Revolution was a near miracle of timing, leadership, and luck. Change any major variable, especially the survival of George Washington, and everything changes. Democracy isn't inevitable. It's not a natural progression of human society. It's a fragile experiment that depends on institutions, yes, but also on individuals choosing to honor those institutions even when they have the power to destroy them. George Washington's greatest victory wasn't at Yorktown or Trenton. It was walking away from power when he could have seized it. That single decision changed the course of human history, and it almost never happened at all. If you found this exploration of alternative history fascinating, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into history's biggest what-ifs. What other historical moments do you think were genuine turning points? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and they often inspire future videos.